also met with President Trump at the White House. And joining us now is the former Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, longtime colleague of the late Senator Lindsey Graham, still a friend of President Zelensky, also author of the new book, What Conservatives Believe. Mr. Vice President, it's always great to have you with us at the desk, and good to see you today. You came to see us straight from the service, and we appreciate that. I know it's been an emotional day. I wonder if this is the clarifying moment that Ukraine needed to get Washington back on its side.
Well, first, thanks for simply acknowledging the life and service and legacy of Senator Lindsey Graham. America lost a great American statesman, but I lost a friend. I met him when I arrived on Capitol Hill 25 years ago. I knew him as a senator. I knew him when we were serving in the White House together. Yeah. And a more tenacious advocate for American freedom at home and abroad. I don't think I'll ever know. But all through it, and you heard this a bit in the service today, there was that winsome sense of humor. Lindsey Graham is someone who he took the world seriously, but he did not take himself too seriously. And that was part of his magic.
Well, to that point then, is this the moment? Seeing all these, you were in the room with world leaders, with senators who were going to vote this evening on a Russia sanctions package, and a president of the United States who some think has wavered at times when it comes to Ukraine. What did today mean?
Well, I honestly hope that the greatest tribute to Senator Lindsey Graham will be when the Senate tonight begins the process of voting on tough new sanctions against Russia following that brutal and unprovoked invasion of 4 years ago. Literally, his last act was traveling to Kiev, meeting with President Zelensky, who I spoke to briefly today, thanking him for traveling to the funeral and acknowledging Senator Graham's contributions to the U.S.-Ukraine relationship. But my hope is that for all of the accolades that have been expressed about Senator Lindsey Graham, and they're all true, that what he would have hoped for the most is for our nation to impose the kind of sanctions, marshal the West again in support of Ukraine, and make it possible for the military of Ukraine to repel and defeat that Russian invasion and create the conditions for lasting peace.
Well, and I wonder if you feel for President Zelensky and for Ukraine that they should feel in this moment more optimistic because of the prospect of this happening, or concerned that one of their fiercest allies, most tenacious, as you described him, and Lindsey Graham, is no longer there to liaise with the White House and with lawmakers here in Washington? Well,
I think it's a fair question, but what I've been very encouraged about is after some stops and starts early in this new Trump administration in support for Ukraine, in the last 6 months, we've seen President Trump and his national security team really begin to lean in support of Ukraine. The announcement of providing anti-ballistic missile technology, the Patriot missile technology, to Ukraine, I think sent a very important signal. I think, frankly, the fact that Ukraine in many ways has reinvented modern warfare with the use of drones, has been taking the fight directly to the mainland of Russia and even to the heart of Moscow, has created a new dynamic. But all along the way, I don't know for a fact, because I'm looking from the outside in, but I just have a sense that more than any other American, it was Senator Lindsey Graham's tenacious commitment to freedom, to understanding that the battle between Russia and Ukraine was really a frontier in the cause of freedom, and that America needed to stand with our ally, as did all of the West.
He was known as well as one of the biggest Iran hawks, if I can use that term, in Washington, and was celebrating the president for his decision to go in some 5 months ago now. I'm sure you're well aware that the pause is now days long. I just wonder your thoughts on this. If the president is reopening the peace process at the right time, or if we're talking with people who simply cannot be trusted.
Well, I was grateful for Senator Graham's efforts and the president's decision to strike Iran a year ago in Operation Midnight Hammer, and then to launch Operation Epic Fury. Our military has responded brilliantly And again, as the memorandum of understanding, almost disintegrated before the ink dried, I think President Trump rightly unleashed our military back against sites within Iran and let them know that if we have to settle this on the battlefield, we will. But I think so long as we maintain our force presence, and in fact, the administration has been growing our force presence in recent weeks, as long as we maintain that blockade, and my understanding is this new sanctions bill on Russia may well also include new sanctions on Iran. My hope is that we can get whoever it is that's in charge of Iran on any given day to finally come to the table and be willing to accept our conditions, which is abandon and dismantle their nuclear weapons program, ballistic missiles, end support for terrorism, and restore freedom of navigation in the Strait. President Trump's recent military action, a dozen days, I think sent the message that this pause is simply perhaps maybe one last opportunity for the Iranian government to recognize that we can do this the easy way at the negotiating table, achieving what we need to achieve for peace and security, or we will certainly allow the armed forces of the United States and our ally Israel to do it the hard way.
Well, I'm glad you raised Israel because Netanyahu, the prime minister, did meet with the president at the White House today as well. There has obviously been something of a public rift between the two, or at the very least, President Trump has not shied away from sharp criticism of Netanyahu in Israel. And I wonder if you're concerned about the trajectory of that relationship. In your book, you write about not only how it's a conservative principle to pursue peace through strength, but also to stand by Israel, and if we're turning away from that in some way.
Well, I am concerned about it. On the progressive left, where even the voices of anti-Semitism have been accepted, even among public men and women. But on the populist right, we've seen people questioning America's support for Israel. But I have to tell you, I know President Trump better than his most ardent defenders. I've known Prime Minister Netanyahu for maybe 2 decades. Spoke to him briefly at the funeral today. We had a warm exchange. And while there can be periodic friction, I am very confident that this administration knows that if the world knows nothing else, the world should know this. America stands with Israel, and we always will.
Last time Benjamin Netanyahu was at the White House to meet with the president was only days before the U.S. began this operation. There have been questions about the photographs that we saw released from the prime minister's office showing a number of the president's top lieutenants, including the defense secretary, in the room with them today. Some wondered, is this a détente or a breakup? Will something important happen a couple of days from now that they've met again?
Well, I think it's a fascinating question. I spent a lot of time in that room, so I'm not in a position to speculate any more than you are. But
I'm not sure about that.
I think it's really up to the Iranians. There's an old saying that once you're in conflict with another nation, the enemy has a vote.
Yes.
They opened the door to a memorandum of understanding that would achieve our objectives, which, as I said, are very clear: no nuclear weapons, no ballistic missiles, freedom of navigation, and no more support for terrorism. They had a shot. They blew it. They started to fire on vessels transiting the Strait, and the president responded with overwhelming force by the United States military. We control the airspace over Iran, even at this very hour, and I think whether or not we are back in military action in days or weeks will all depend on whether the Iranians come to their senses. But either way, I believe that if we cannot settle it at the negotiating table and achieve those specific goals and objectives, which are in the interest of the security of the region and the security of the American people, then I think we have to allow the armed forces of the United States and our ally Israel to finish the job.
Well, there also becomes a question of the cost associated and the funding that is necessary for that. The administration has made a supplemental funding request to Congress. Right. There is an effort through reconciliation to provide some money to the Pentagon. It's being complicated by the fact that the president also wants to see as much of the Save America Act passed as possible. And I wonder, given everything you were just saying about protecting Americans at home, trying to finish the job, if his goals here are working against one another, if you see it that way.
I don't, although I'm a strong supporter of the Save America Act. You know, it was probably 20 years ago that Indiana adopted voter ID. The very suggestion that having people show a picture ID when they vote discourages voting. I think Indiana in the past decade and a half has set records for the number of people participating in voting, and more than 24 states have adopted voter ID with the same result. But I think there's no more important responsibility of the federal government than to provide for the common defense. And I think wherever the Save America Act settles out in this moment, I have every confidence that Republican majorities, through the reconciliation process or otherwise, are going to find a way to get our troops what they need and send a deafening message to our enemies in Iran and to potential adversaries around the world that America is going to remain strong.
Can I ask you, Mr. Vice President, about something that's going to be unfolding on Capitol Hill a bit later on? We have the Russia sanctions vote that we already described. There's also going to be an important vote on Todd Blanche's nomination. This could go into the next couple of days, we understand, to get the permanent role of Attorney General. We've got a couple of Republican senators who you know very well, in John Cornyn and Tom Tillis, who have issues with this idea of an anti-weaponization fund. They want it in writing that that's not going to happen. And this may well be held up for some time as a result. Are they on the right side of history with this?
Well, I was encouraged when the administration and the acting attorney general said that they had abandoned any plan to create a weaponization fund. I mean, I don't think people that assaulted police officers on January 6th should ever get a dime of taxpayer money.
I wouldn't think.
And, I felt I still have great concerns about the president having pardoned people that engaged in violence against law enforcement and vandalism at our Capitol on that fateful day. But as I said, I'm encouraged that the acting attorney general has expressed a willingness to step back from that. I expect as the confirmation process goes forward that members of the Senate will get the answers that they need, and they'll vote accordingly.
Well, it wasn't just the anti-weaponization fund. It was also the immunity from audits for the president and his family that have caused issues. Do you believe that, too, should go away?
Well, I think it's all in the courts right now. I mean, I know we had one federal court decision that actually questioned whether or not the agreement was even justiciable when the same party is on both sides. Right. So I'll leave that question to the courts. But I do recognize that the President of the United States, and I went through the confirmation process with a lot of our appointees. The President is entitled to the cabinet of his choosing. The role of the Senate is to advise and consent, and I expect that they'll do their job as always.
There's the matter of Jay Clayton as well. It looks like he will be confirmed, despite some very odd exchanges about the 2020 election that I suspect got your attention during his confirmation process. Do you trust him with the keys to our intelligence apparatus?
I hold Jay Clayton in the highest personal regard. Yeah. He's one of those names in the Justice Department that always resonated with both sides of the aisle. And I'm not surprised that he's getting the support that he's getting, and I would anticipate his confirmation forthwith.
All right, Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for sharing time with us today and coming straight from the memorial services from the late Senator Lindsey Graham, the former Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, with us here on Balance of Power, and we'll have much more ahead on Bloomberg TV.